Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to one and all gathered here to become a part of RedTeam Security Summit 2021. On behalf of RedTeam Hacker Academy Private Limited, I wish to welcome you all, the respected dignitaries and participants present here to RedTeam Security Summit 2021. And a very warm good morning and good evening to all the participants, viewers from abroad countries. And I welcome our chief speaker of this session, Ms. Kritika Thakur. Welcome you all to the grand event of Red Team Security Summit 2021. I am Jazila Vengat, event coordinator at Red Team Hacker Academy Private Limited. So we are glad to host such an efficient cybersecurity geeks at the Red Team Security Summit 2021. A warm thank you to the event planners, production crews, and to the audience. You are fabulous people over here. A massive thank you to all our event partners, supporting partners, community partners, and media partners and tech partners for this year's Red Team Security Summit 2021. We are grateful for your continued support of this essential event, which continually challenges young security professionals across the globe to develop their skills and gain the practical experience needed in this industry. So we hope you enjoyed working with us on this year's event and look forward to working with you in the run and up to next year's event and more and more. So to begin with, I feel very fortunate to have been here to announce our next topic, which will be on API testing, delivering by Dr. Kritika Thakur, software engineer and security researcher, and also the woman in cybersecurity. A warm-hearted welcome to Dr. Kritika ma'am to our Red Team Security Summit 2021. We are very grateful to honor you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to address our event. I hope and wish your presentation would be the highlight of today's event. So welcome Dr. Kritika ma'am. Now we can start. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Jazila, for such a warm welcome. And yeah, let's get started with the summit.
Yes, sure, ma'am. You can just start now.
Okay. Just let me know if the presentation is visible.
Yes. Good.
Okay,
You
sure.
can go now.
So, good morning and good evening, people. I am a security engineer at Bobble AI and also a security researcher and also doing bug bounties from past 3 years. I've done the area of specialization like network penetration testing, API testing, and also in web applications. Let's get started with today. Today I'm going to talk on API testing. People nowadays they don't know how to approach the API. So let's get started with the introduction first. What exactly APIs are? So APIs are they allow one application to communicate with another, having two direct interoperability mechanisms built within. So, for example, there are two main categories of API architecture that we want to look into. The first being one of the more commonly used forms of API, that is REST. Now, REST is short for representational state transfer and is actually lighter and more flexible than the other main API SOAP. Now, a SOAP API is actually not an architecture. It is a protocol that builds on REST API. SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol, and it basically uses more strict security standards to particularly ensure that the integrity and confidentiality of its contents over a REST API. So there are mainly four types of APIs. Let's talk about them. First is the public APIs. Now, as the name suggested, like public means open APIs. Like they do not require any kind of authentication to access or resources. Rather, it is like open source. It can be found in the source code of the many web applications we have nowadays. For example, let's say Bugsnax API. Second comes the internal APIs. Now, internal APIs require authentication and are intended to be used like by a specific user base. For example, like the admins of a particular web pages. Let's take another example, like bank would use a series of internal APIs, likely like SOAP, to allow interconnectivity across its internal infrastructure. Thirdly, we have partner APIs. Now, partner APIs are used in the case of an organization extending its resources to a third party. Like party is providing some kind of resources to a particular web application. Now, this may be a result of a business agreement. Fourth comes the composite APIs. Now, composite APIs like particularly a mixture of different APIs that help building of the APIs more efficient. Now, composite APIs are considered to be an architectural solution to some of the pretty difficult problems which we face nowadays in the REST APIs. Let's come to the testing part. The first thing which you should test when you get a parameter is broken object level authorization. Let's talk about it. Now, broken object level authorization. Now, as the name says, it's all related to the object. Object can be like the people who know what is object oriented programming, they can know it better. So a broken object issues occurs when the server does not properly check if the currently logged in user or if a logged out user can actually read, write, delete, update or delete in particular object. So particular parameter and the object id, in this case I'm referring that like which they do not have the rights to do. So there are two types of broken authorization on the object level. So these are either user ID is passed on to the server or an object ID. Let's have a deeper look at it. So based on user ID. So sometimes we have seen the parameter like this stated here in the PPT, like target.com. Then there's a parameter user ID, which is stated as a particular profile's user ID of a particular user. So, as a bug bounty hunter or as a security researcher, you should always your this thing should always strike into your mind, like what can we do with this particular parameter. Now, what if we replace this user ID with someone else's user ID, and we should not, like, that's the basic motto of these particular things, like we should not be able to view the particular other user's profile. But if there is a vulnerability called broken object level authorization, this issue arises. You can view the other person's profile, or let's say other things also, by this user ID, by changing this user ID parameter. So in this example, we need to check if the user ID from the get parameter is same as the user ID of the object's owner. So here is the particular code which is doing the work. Now let's talk about the object ID based on the object ID, the broken object authorization. So this can happen particularly very easily. Like for example, when a developer needs to secure some resources and some not, so they might forget to secure on of the objects which should not be, which should be secured. Like they can forget, the developers can forget. So for example, if we build an application to add the products, but the user should only be able to edit their own products, so we have these three particular calls to do so: the get request, the post, the delete. The get request for getting the details, the post request for updating the products details, the delete request to delete a particular product we don't want anymore. So these calls are particularly secure, and users can only execute them for their own objects. But after a year, we want to add an option to import the products via CSV. So here's the request which is doing the work to importing the products via CSV. So here is the code, like here the developers forget to check if the user is allowed to write to that product with the ID is equal to 1. Now ID can be different also in your case. And the attacker can overwrite the product details of the products that do not belong to them. For example, if I pass a delete request and change the user ID parameter, and that particular user's product gets deleted, then that's an vulnerability which we are talking right now. So here's the same thing this particular code is doing. This is just checking the ID and passing it through, like update the data. If we are not passing the ID, then we are not allowed to view this data or update this data, and we'll get redirected to the home page. But if we have the ID, if we have passed the ID, the particular reports gets imported in a CSV format. So when a functionality integrates with another functionality, it's easy to overlook certain security considerations because the two functionalities are often developed separately and sometimes even in a separate teams. Like the big companies have the separate teams to develop more functionalities to their software. So if the software designer and the developers are not careful, and they can easily make a mistake and forget to implement some required checks that prevent the broken object level authorization vulnerabilities. For example, so here we have a piece of code where we are allowed, as a user, we are allowed to add a particular item within 10 minutes, in 10 minutes. What if we change the user products, and within that particular time period we can add as much product as we want? So an attacker can easily abuse this background call because everything is happening in background. This can be the vulnerability, like this can be exploited more. Secondly, let's come to the second testing method, broken user authentication. Let's talk about it. So whenever we come across an API endpoint that handles authentication, we need to be extra careful since these endpoints will often determine how a user can flow through the application and what they see. So whenever one of the following conditions is true, so we can say like that is the broken user authentication. I've mentioned some of the points. So if your API allows for credential stuffing, so this is an attack where a hacker will try to brute force the credentials by using a list of unknown account names and passwords from the other websites. For example, as earlier we said, we have a user ID parameter and we can delete few things. So what if I brute force on that user ID parameter and I check what account is the admin account so that I can enter into that account? Then that comes into this vulnerability. Now attackers will take these old credentials and try them on our API endpoints rapidly to see if any of the accounts work on the particular application. Rate limiting should exist. That's why. If the API endpoints does not verify the request with a captcha when needed, so this condition is true, then there is a broken user authentication. Thirdly, when the application allows for weak passwords, so the best policy is to use a passphrase instead of a password, but anything is better than a weak password, like using all kinds of strings and all. When the endpoint uses get parameter, so the parameters are actually visible in the URL due to this get request, then that request can be vulnerable to MITM attacks. Like attacker can be sniffing on to your request and can see the tokens passed through your request. Fourthly, we can say when our endpoint issues a token such as JWT token but does not validate it at the endpoint. Next, let's come to the attack scenarios. Of some, I went to my bug bounty journey. So, firstly, is the password recovery. So, the attacker might start the workflow to reset the password by triggering this particular password endpoint. So, this endpoint is passing a user ID that is 123. What if I change the user ID right over here and the password reset functionality works and the particular user gets the password reset token? So this will trigger a password reset for a user, and the user will receive a password reset token in their mailbox, which can be a 4-digit or a 6-digit number. So if there is no rate limiting on the endpoint, the attacker can brute force this particular 4-digit number and can log into the account easily. So here the attacker is guessing the token and resetting the password for the user. Next comes the JWT validation endpoint accepts none algorithm. So a JWT endpoint should always validate a token with a proper algorithm. So most JWT frameworks have a none algorithm enabled by default, and this is very bad to know, like why we should have a look at how JWT for workforce. So a JWT token is a JSON web token. So these tokens contain the information about the users, for example, and the beauty is that we can always easily decode these and view the information as done right below in this image. So this is the particular JWT token which was in the request, and this is the decoded form of the request. Now here you can see the user ID, the name, the IIT number, and everything is passed in the decoded format, encoded format in a JWT token. So we can simply change something in a JWT token and encode it again. And when we change the algorithm to none, so here the user ID was 123, and after decoding this particular thing, I changed the user ID into 567 and again encoded it. So if we now replace this token in our headers, when we make a request, we should see an error because our token should not validate. However, if the server is still configured to accept the request signed with the none algorithm, they will be vulnerable to broken user authentication. Third comes the excessive data exposure. So let's get deeper into this. An API is only supposed to return the required data to the front end clients, but sometimes the developers will make a mistake or take the easy route and implement generic APIs that return all the data to the client. So when these APIs return too much of data, we can speak of the excessive data exposure. Now, a simple example in this we can see in this attack scenario we can give is an application which makes a call to grab the credit card details. So the user does not see the CVV because it will be filtered out by the front end client. The API still returns too much of data. So if we talk with this API endpoint, still we are getting the CVE, which is actually vulnerable, as we are seeing a lot of data returning by our API endpoint. This is the next scenario. So in this scenario, we have a mobile application that sends a request to an particular API articles and the comment section. So and gets the metadata about the comment as well, including the author. So however, when the attacker is sniffing the data, he can also see the PII data from the author. As see, the request is this getting like this. So here the username, user address is also visible, user email is also visible, which can be used for further brute forcing attacks. So let's have a look at HackerOne's report. So an attacker can disclose any user's private email by creating a sandbox program, then adding the user to a report as a participant. Now, if the attacker issued a request to fetch the report through the API, the response will contain invited user private email at the activities object. Now, this was the report which was actually getting the victim's email opened in the API endpoint. So we can actually view the user's email. Fourthly, let's talk about the rate limiting, lack of rate limiting. So whenever an API is served, a request it will have to respond to generate this response. The API requires the resources like CPU, RAM, network, and at times even the disk space. But how much are required highly depends on the task at hand. So the more logic processing happens or the data is returned, the more the resources are taken up by a single call, and this can stack on quick. So if we do not rate limit our API endpoints, this issue is made even worse by the fact that most APIs reside on the shared host, which means they are all fighting for same resources, which could mean the attacker is disabling a secondary unrelated API by consuming all the resources. I know this is a bit confusing. You'll get to know by future attack scenarios. So here. So this is the one attack scenario. So there are simple examples of attacks related to the particular lack of rate limiting on the endpoint, but those are like easy enough to catch. So a somewhat deeper attacker could be a user who discovers the endpoint to create a file which does not have a rate limiting, and an endpoint to copy a file does not have a rate limiting. So at first this might seem hard to abuse, but if we create a document on the system, here it is the create document.php, that has a large file size and then copy it over might trigger the server to run out of the resources. So this is actually a size of the very large size, as you can see right over here, but the server does not have so much of like resources to handle it, and thus it is triggering it. So with the response of the ID 12, if we try to trigger this call multiple times, we'll notice the rate limiting on the endpoint. So let's just create the particular ID parameter, but there might be a get call which is not rate limited, and by triggering it multiple times, we might consume all the server's resources. So this is like getting server down very quickly. Here's the HackerOne's report. So here the report like the particular the particular user has brute forced the token parameter from an API endpoint to generate the valid token. And after certain attempts, he was getting the 200 OK status, and which was actually vulnerable to brute forcing attacks. So this can be the one. Next comes the broken function level authorization. Now this vulnerability type, like, it basically focuses on the fact that sometimes user may be able to edit the properties of their own accounts, like I want to change my email address, or I want to change my password, like, which increases their own low privileges to higher ones, or where unauthenticated users can make a legitimate request, like I can change being an attacker, I can change other users password. So these vulnerabilities can be easy to miss, but still they are somewhat easier to find due to predictable nature of API endpoints. So we can, for example, try different HTTP methods, or simply replacing in the URL, such as like employees to manager, so if we can get any data. So let's come into the attack scenarios. So we will be looking at a target which contains two types of accounts: franchisee holder and a company looking to exploit the franchisee. So let's say the franchisee as a premium holder. So both the log into the same URL, but the premium holder type of account is more like expensive one. So, however, by going to the account settings and saving, we notice a hidden parameter which was actually not visible to us. That was the account type. Here you can see the account type, and we change it to the exploitant to from exploitant to the premium holder. So this allows the user to buy a lower price type of the account and change it to the higher priced account, that is the premium one. And sending this request, the user can upgrade their own accounts to a more expensive account type. Here you can see the request. So by just changing the like the body of like this parameter account type to the premium holder, we got the access as a premium holder. Second example, we can add is where users try to view the documents. However, they can only view their own documents. Obviously, by reporting their own documents, though, the user is presented a URL, which is API document export. So this URL does return the proper documents, and only the belonging to the user. But by simply guessing, the user discovers a URL that returns all the books parameters. So this is the request. Like, this request is returning this kind of response. Since the users can only see their own documents, they can only see those two. However, if they export the documents, the user notices, they can change the path and export all the documents. Like by changing the path to the documents slash export will return the same as before. However, the API documents explore all exports all the documents. So this comes in the URL tampering also. Then comes the mass assignment. So applications these days often rely on the objects. For example, user, product. These are the parameters, and these objects have the properties. For example, the product.stock. As a user, we have the authorization to edit and view the specific properties of the objects, that we might also be limited and not able to edit or view some specific properties. For example, user can view product.stock, but user should not be able to edit product.stock. So these properties are then matched to the parameters on the front end, and this conversation happens automatically. So they might convert the parameters to the parameters the attacker should be able to access. For example, the user should never be able to edit the product dot title, but the front end might convert a parameter title to product dot title if the user sends a put request. So here are some examples of the properties the user should not be able to edit. A normal user should not be able to edit. So the account dot type or account dot discounts enable. These are the properties that relate to the permissions, like should the particular user get the discounts or not, this kind of permissions. Then comes the account dot wallet. Now this can be adding the coins to the wallet. This property should not never be editable by the attacker or any user. Then the product dot title. So these are the internal properties the user should never be able to edit. Now the attack scenarios regarding this thing. So first example is from an application that allows you to make an appointment. Let's assume there's an appointment making app, so which lasts 1 hour. um, okay, I'm able to see this is from my bug bounty report. So there was an appointment app where we can take the appointments. We can just mention the start date, the end date. These parameters are not visible to us. Now the thing arises, like what if we change the start or the end date? We can fully book the agenda of the particular consultant we wish. So if I changed this 2022 to 2099, all the slots in between these dates will be filled for the particular consultant ID 123. Now this can be the more this can be more exploitable. Now, second example, simple as that, account setting. So there are two types of accounts here in this scenario. One is the airport and the other is the airline one. So the request send is like this for the normal user, which is in the airport. So the particular parameters are passed: user ID, consultant ID. That's it. And the uh, response we get is that our account type is airport, and the end date as mentioned here, and the user ID and consultant ID. But what if we add this account type here and change it to the airline? As we know, there are two parameters. So if we did that, the response from the API occurred like this: the account type got changed to the airline. Now this is also the vulnerability. Seventh comes the security misconfiguration. Now this is the important one. So the threat vectors are very quite a lot here. So it can range from not encrypting traffic between the servers to having a shadow API on the network that is not maintained and poorly configured to allow for the SSH access. So let's see the attack scenario. So on a particular endpoint, if the manual says we cannot disable the admin, like a normal user cannot disable the admin, but let us say, what if we did it? Let's assume like we know the user ID of the admin is 123. So let's see the request. So here I've changed the post request to the delete one, and the user ID is mentioned over here, which is 123, which is the admin's user ID as we know, and we'll just pass this request. So if we have a success of 200 with with this request, then it's a security misconfiguration because it is deleting the admin's account. As said in the manual, it cannot delete it. The second scenario, if we found a server which had their HTTP configured improperly, so which had disastrous consequences. So due to the anonymous put file upload, then we are able to upload an exploit that can get us a reverse shell, like a PHP reverse shell. Here, the uploaded binary of the file, like this is the test.php, is the PHP reverse shell. So we'll just upload it and we get 403 forbidden as usual. So we can then easily, but let's say we can then easily call the file from the browser, and by using this thing, get the file and the file name. So where the test.php is actually a reverse shell to the server. So the HTTP put method should have been disabled, but it was not. And that's why it worked. So just by changing this post to this put, we are getting 200 OK. And we can just trigger the file by using the get parameter to the test.php where we have uploaded it, and we get the reverse shell. Now this is clearly a security misconfiguration. Then comes the injection. So when they don't sanitize the input from the front end, we are opening ourselves to the world of problems, to the world of vulnerabilities. This would allow the users to input anything which could intervene with the later processes. So the same goes for the validation and the verification of the API's request. So these have to be done before the data enters any kind of processes. This is where it could start causing the problems. For an example, on the login calls, make sure the API is validating, verifying, and sanitizing any input. For example, here there can be SQL injection, which can be used to bypass the login system and get the admin privileges. Thirdly, make sure that you pay attention to not just the input from the user directly. This can also come from the third-party services or the file uploads. For example, take into the account there might be the processes such as batch jobs running that could trip over the data. So let's not get confused over here. Let's see the attack scenario for the SQL injection. So this I found this issue while doing the bug bounties on a private program, and it happened because the developers did sanitize all the direct input very well, except they did not think to include the import functionality because the base of the application was built a year prior to building the import functionality. So this made the application dump the entire users table in the error message. So the error message was including the entire dump of the user's name, address, email, phone, and that's how the SQL injection works. The next scenario, see if we have a parameter on a particular target. So let's assume we have OS param into the target.com. So in this example, we can set up the burp suite intruder with a list of command injections in it, and we can try multiple injections at a point of time. Our like intruder can try these command injections. So here the command which worked was, in my case, it was the character, new line character, and the ping command, which actually delayed the response. And this way the OS command injection works. Thank you for having me today as a speaker for the RedTeam Security Summit. Hi, Jazila. Shall I?
Okay, congratulations, ma'am. It was an awesome speech, and we well done on providing such an excellent speech to the participants. Can you hear me,
Thank.
ma'am?
Yeah, I can. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me.
Yeah, it was great to see so many students taking an interest in what you were saying, and there is certainly a greater understanding of the issues that are facing by the people due to cyber attacks. Everyone is looking forward to hearing from you again, certainly, ma'am, with more bug bounding topics. Your professional quality of the presentation were awesome. You addressed the merits and demerits of the API testing and API public, like API public API, open source API, bug snags API, and broken object level authorization, broken user authentication, and bug bounding, password recovery, JWT validation, and excessive data exposure, attack scenario, security misconfiguration. All the topics you were covered by this session, and that was awesome. And it's a very satisfied speech done by you. Now we have one Q&A section for the audience. We can thank you so much for a fascinating presentation on the topic, ma'am. It was it was incredible. We were all enthralled by your great insightful speech. Thank you once again. Now we can check with the audience if they have any doubts or questions to ask for. Uh, Audience, do you have any questions to ask for Dr. Kritika, ma'am? You can drop down your questions and doubts in the Q&A section that will be showing on your right hand side of the screen.
Okay, I can see few questions arrive. where we can find the API endpoints other than by directory brute forcing. Yeah, you can use Burp Suite. Actually, it has a great features alongside. You can capture all the requests, all the API callings, everything, and then you can check for the endpoints and you can work on it. As I mentioned, a lot of vulnerabilities can arise while API testing. Then there are a lot of tools, but before going to the tools, I would recommend use the Burp Suite and just capture the request, work on it, try different payloads, try the intruder, put it in the repeater, put, try different kinds of payloads, OS command injection, SQL injection on the login pages, on the search parameters, accesses on each and every parameter you find. You can even use Burp's match and replace feature to automate your testing. Yeah, you can get a lot of tools from GitHub, but before relying on the tools, I would mention, like, don't just go with the tools like that tools were there because they wanted to test some other parameters they wanted to. So you have some different implementations in the application which you are working. So that's why I'm telling you, just use Burp Suite and go for it.
Any more questions from the audience? Guys, you can drop down your questions. I I think, ma'am, all finished the question answer.
Yeah.
We can take 1 minute. We can wait for.
Yeah, the basics of API. Yeah, you can firstly go and see how the APIs are working, what are the implementations, and what are the different kinds of APIs, like how the REST API, SOAP API works. And then, like, if you want to do the pen testing part, like, I would recommend going for OWASP, and you can check their pages for a lot of information. Okay, there was a GitHub repository. I don't remember the name. You can just search API pen testing GitHub, and that will give you the first repository you come across. That is the one you can use for the basics, a very basic of API, to get to know how to do the things with the APIs. Yeah, the Burp Suite Community Edition is also helpful. I do personally use the community one more rather than the professional one. Community one is actually like, yeah, you don't need to pay money for community one. Like, go for it. Don't buy professional one until and unless you are not in the production, like testing the production environment. Yeah, I'll try my best to put the PPT in the. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Any more questions?
I'll just drop the PPT.
API reading. Ma'am, you can share the PPT in Hangouts, I think.
Okay, just a second.
In the Hangouts, we can share the PDF, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm trying, but I by mistakenly uploaded the wrong one. Not able. Yeah, yeah, deleting it. Just a second.
Ma'am, you can upload PDF format. Okay?
Yeah, just a second. Just check out. I've just uploaded it.
Yes, it's available.
Okay.
All of you can download the PDF from presentation PDF from the handout session.
Okay, ma'am. I think the Q&A section is over now.
Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, last finally, it was awesome answering to the all questions you have. And ma'am, would you like to give any concluding notes to the audience for a last words from your side?
Yes. I would tell like just practice a lot, and that will give you one day. It will like pay you off really
Sure.
good. Your practice, like try harder always.
Yes, that was the. We have to tell one thing only. We have to practice more and more in order to get successful career life, right, ma'am?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Kritika, ma'am. We would like to have you in the future ventures also. It's my pleasure to thank you on behalf of Red Team Hacker Academy and from the audience side too. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was an awesome, wonderful speech done by you. So the broadcast will be going to end up here. Thank you, one and all. A massive thank you to all our event partners, supporting partners, community partners, media partners, and tech partners for this year's Red Team Security Summit 2021. Once again, a big thank you to our proud community partners, WICS, a community for empowering women and girls in cybersecurity, ASRG, Automotive Security Research Group, OWASP Seasides, Cyber Peace Foundation, Computer Society of India since 1965, Cyberfrat, a tech fraternity, VC's Women in Cybersecurity, InfoSec Diversity, Shell and Open Security Community by Red Team, Coffee with Red Team, DEFCON 29, Adversary Village, and our media partners, Secure Leading, Bluepin, and our event organizer, Red Team Hacker Academy, and our official organizer, Red Team Hacker Academy, Red Team Cybersecurity Labs, your trusted cybersecurity advisory partner, our tech partners, Hack the Box, a massive hacking playground, and our supporting partners, CAFIT, Calcut Forum for IT, GTech, the collaborative of IT companies in Kerala, Payathu, research-powered cybersecurity services and training, Cyberpark Calicut, creating the opportunities. Thank you to one and all the partners on behalf of Red Team Security Summit 2021. Now we have an upcoming session by Mr. Amit Muzail, sir, to deliver the speech on building ICS and SCADA security test lab. So the session will start up at sharp 3:15 p.m. So please stay tuned, guys, and switch over to the next session after 15 minutes of break. Thank you once again for your great cooperation. Guys, you can go and check out the booths in the left hand side of your screen on which you can discuss with the stall of Red Team Hacker Academy and Hack the Box team about more details. Thank you for all your great cooperation. Once again, here we are winding up this session. Have a good day to all. Thank you.